From a studio high above the clouds of the Okanagan Valley, this is the Cannabis Podcast. Exploring the world of Canadian cannabis culture, one toke at a time. Now, here's your host and bud tender, Gary Johnston.
And let me welcome you back to the Cannabis Podcast. Thank you so much for coming back. If this is your very first visit, well, here's an especially warm welcome for you. Ahead, the next 30 or 40 minutes, we're going to fill with information about a plant I'm absolutely passionate about, and that is cannabis. I suspect you may be too. That could be why you're here. Now, before we get too much further, let me remind you, this program is intended only for those 19 or older in your jurisdiction, and is intended purely for entertainment and perhaps educational purposes. You should always consume your cannabis responsibly. In episode 156, we're going to cover a topic everyone's interested in, cannabis and sex. Part 1 of that discussion happens today. The horrors of the hop latent viroid and its impact on the cannabis industry. Some advice to stay away from weed stock. Will the U.S. reclassification of cannabis lead to more research? We hope so. And we're going to add some taste with flavonoids. Plus, we're going to head back to the coast, to Broken Coast, for Emergenz on Cultivar Corner. All of that and more on episode 156 of the Cannabis Podcast. Hey, thanks for being here. I am so appreciative of the fact that you are a listener of the Cannabis Podcast. And I also want to thank my supporters, Jordana, Keith, and Jordan at buymeacoffee.com/cannabispodcast. If you feel so inclined and you like what you hear, you as well can go there and buy me a doobie. And I'll remind you, 1% of the income that comes in through Buy Me a Coffee goes to climate change research. And at Patreon, I want to thank Tony, Roger, Rob, Gage, Lloyd, and Mitchell, all my Patreons. Thank you so much for your support. You'll find the links to all of those in the top right of the show page. And now, let's get to our first story. I don't know what your experience in buying weed stock has been. I know mine has been very light, but I'm about to share a story with you from my buddy David Wiley at the ounce.ca. And the headline says, "Take it from me, don't get burned by weed stocks." Weed stocks have been on a high over news of a historic shift in the U.S. over cannabis. Here's some free advice for bright-eyed and bushy-tailed would-be weed investors. Be wary of cannabis stocks. They shoot up in the good times like now, but they crash much faster. If you can't help yourself but to invest, at least get in early and get out quick. Otherwise, accept the risk of being the sucker who bought at the apex and ended up on the ocean floor, weighed down by a bunch of worthless paper. How do I know this? Hello. My name is David, and I'm a cannabis stocks investor. Cannabis stocks have been my worst gamble, if we're being honest. I've had the same success with slot machines. I really only have myself to blame for investing in poorly run companies that overpromised and underdelivered. The signs were clearly there, and yet I still walked the financial plank into shark-infested waters. As a journalist, I've reported on my fair share of bad judgment calls made by terrible executives, both incompetent and greedy ones, since way back to the beginning of legalization. I've watched a lot of companies rise, and I've watched almost as many of them fall. In many cases, the writing was on the wall really early on. Thankfully, as a reporter, I can't afford to invest very much, so my weed stock losses weren't high enough to hurt too badly. A lot of people lost a lot more. Recently, I unloaded almost all of my cannabis stocks, all at a loss of over 95%. I sold them because I didn't want to look at all those bloody red numbers anymore. Honestly, dumping them was a relief. Maybe the silver lining is that investing in weed stocks was a good lesson in what not to do for a first-time investor like me. I'd like to think I'm wiser now. Meanwhile, I continue to rationalize my losses by telling myself that part of the reason I bought cannabis stocks was for the investor intel. After my own personal weed stock dump, I now only hold one cannabis investment. Perhaps it's sentimental to have just one in a more reliable portfolio. The investment is HMMJ, which is an exchange-traded fund, an ETF, containing a stable of weed stocks. As of this writing, it's only plummeted 69.420% on me since I bought it. That makes it my best-performing cannabis investment. And I don't know about you, but I have had similar experience to David. I also, not a big, huge investor, don't spend a lot of money on stocks, never have. I did buy some cannabis stocks early on in the process, just as legalization was coming up. I also dumped them fairly early. I didn't lose a bunch of money. I gained marginal amounts. Never been a big investor. What is your strategy for investing in cannabis weed? Are you taking the same approach as David, is kind of hands-off, or are you going all in?
From the cannabis-infused studio in the clouds, this is the Cannabis Podcast.
And I'm sure there's a lot of interest in the story upcoming now. This is from Canigma.com, and we ask the question, is sex better when you're high? This is written by Jessica Riley Chevalier. Does cannabis lead to better sex? For many consumers, the answer is an enthusiastic yes. Heightened sensations, a relaxed mind, and more intense orgasms are just a few of the reasons that millions of users turn to cannabis when it's time to get between the sheets. But does the science back this up? Sex is natural. It's fun, stress-relieving, and a part of life that, by all accounts, we should look forward to. But for millions of people, sex is an additional source of stress. Some 43% of women and 31% of men report trouble in bed, including struggling to reach orgasm and premature ejaculation. Add to that the fact that people are underslept, stressed, and anxious. Getting down and dirty is often the last thing on people's minds. Cannabis can help with that. Not only does the plant lower stress and anxiety levels, people who consume cannabis actually have more sex than people who don't. Take one study that examined over 50,000 men and women. Researchers found that not only did cannabis users have significantly more sex, but in many cases, cannabis improved the sexual experience. Lower stress levels are great, but not being stressed is a low bar for good sex. So what exactly are cannabis users getting out of sex while high? A 2019 study looked at 216 cannabis users and found 58% said cannabis increased their sex drive. 73% reported more satisfying sex. 65% had more intense orgasms. 69% said they could relax more during sex. And 50% reported being able to focus on the experience and present moment better. Cannabis has the potential to be a woman's best friend in the bedroom. Self-reported studies show a correlation between cannabis use and increased sex drive and ability to orgasm. All good news when you consider the orgasm gap reported between genders, where women tend to orgasm less compared to men in heterosexual encounters. A 2019 study surveyed 373 women, half of whom used cannabis and half who did not. Of those who used cannabis, 68.5% said their sexual experience was more pleasurable. 60.6% reported increased sex drive, 52.8% had more satisfying orgasms, and they also had a 2.13% higher chance of satisfactory orgasm than those who didn't use cannabis. The relationship between men and cannabis use and sex is less straightforward than it is for women. A 2019 study of 41 men found a majority of participants who used cannabis before sex had less anxiety and increased sexual pleasure. A 2011 review of studies on men using cannabis and sex found conflicting and contradictory results, with some studies reporting enhanced erectile function and others finding the opposite. Scientists also can't agree on whether the cannabis increases or decreases testosterone production, but current research concludes that cannabis use does have an effect on it. A 2020 review of existing studies found that cannabis could negatively impact male fertility by lowering sperm count. While the science is still far from definitive, there are a myriad of potential pros and cons to using cannabis to enhance your sex life. Potential pros? Increased sexual enjoyment, better, more satisfying orgasms, 50% more chance of achieving orgasm, increased sex drive, people who smoke cannabis tend to have more sex, and ability to stay present and focused on sensations. And potential cons: uncertainty about the effect of THC on testosterone production, possibility of erectile dysfunction, and possibility of lowering sperm count and fertility concerns. And there is our initial discussion of sex and cannabis. This, again, is an article from Kenigma.com, and this is a very long article, and we're going to split it up into a couple of different parts. And when you come back for next episode, we're going to talk about sex and the endocannabinoid system. And for our next story, we are going to npr.org, because I originally picked up the story from the Globe and Mail, but of course that's a pay site, and you might not have been able to get to that information. So this is from npr.org. As the Biden administration moves to reclassify marijuana as a less dangerous drug, scientists say the change will lift some of the restrictions on studying the drug. But the change won't lift all restrictions, they say. Neither will it decrease potential risks of the drug or help users better understand what those risks are. Marijuana is currently classified as a Schedule I controlled substance, which is defined as a substance with no accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. The Biden administration proposed this week to classify cannabis as a Schedule III controlled substance, a category that acknowledges it has some medical benefits. The current Schedule I status imposes many regulations and restrictions on scientists' ability to study weed, even as state laws have made it increasingly available to the public. Cannabis as a Schedule I substance is associated with a number of very, very restricted regulations, says neuroscientist Stacy Gruber, at McLean Hospital and Harvard Medical School. You have very stringent requirements, for example, for storage and security and reporting all these things. These requirements are set by the Food and Drug Administration, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Institutional Review Board, and local authorities, she says. Scientists interested in studying the drug also have to register with the DEA and get a state and federal license to conduct research on the drug. It's a burdensome process, and it is certainly a process that has prevented a number of young and rather invested researchers from pursuing this kind of work, says Gruber. Reclassifying the drug as Schedule III puts it in the same category as ketamine and Tylenol with codeine. Substances in this category have accepted medical use in the United States, have less potential for abuse than in higher categories, and abuse could lead to low to moderate levels of dependence on the drug. This reclassification is a very, very big paradigm shift, says Gruber. I think that has a big trickle-down effect in terms of the perspectives and the attitudes with regard to the actual sort of differences between studying Schedule III versus Schedule I substances. The rescheduling of cannabis will also translate to more research on the benefits and risks of cannabis for the treatment of medical conditions, writes Dr. Andrew Monty in an email. He is Associate Director of Rocky Mountain Poison and Drug Safety and an emergency physician and toxicologist at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. This will also help improve the quality of the research, since more researchers will be able to contribute, he adds, but the change in classification won't significantly expand the number of sources for the drug for researchers, says Gruber. For 50 years, researchers were allowed to use cannabis from only one source, a facility at the University of Mississippi. And then in 2021, the DEA started to add a few more companies to that list of approved sources for medical and scientific research. While she expects more sources to be added in time, she and many of the researchers she knows have yet to benefit from the recently added sources, as most have limited products available. And what we haven't seen is any ability for researchers, cannabis researchers, clinical researchers, to have the ability to study products that our patients and our recreational consumers or adult consumers are actually using, she adds. That remains impossible. And Monty cautions that the reclassification itself doesn't mean that cannabis has no health risks. Monty and his colleagues have been documenting some of those risks in Colorado by studying people who show up in the emergency room after consuming cannabis. Intoxication and cyclical vomiting, cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, and alarming psychiatric symptoms such as psychosis are among the top problems bringing some marijuana users to the hospital. Research on cannabis has been lacking surveillance of these kind of impacts for decades, he says, and rescheduling the drug will not fill that gaping hole in risk surveillance, he writes. Well, let's hope that the reclassification that is currently scheduled in the United States will have some positive impacts on research around the world.
THC, CBD, terpene profiles, what's in me? Oh, please explain to me. Cultivar Corner, Cultivar Corner, oh yeah. Cultivar Corner, please explain this stuff to me.
You know, it doesn't matter what we do in life. Things are going to happen that affect us and change us a little bit. And such is the case today. Of course, the Cannabis podcast happens every week. Cultivar Corners are happening every week, which means I have to be producing them every week, which means that when I have a bit of a cold, it can be a bit of a challenge. And today is such a challenge. You may not be able to detect some cold in my voice. I know because I can hear it every day. I can tell when it's there. Others perhaps can't. But I have had a cold for the last couple of days. Kind of one of those sneezy kind of head colds, kind of always there, and not quite sure why. Well, I guess there's no really determination of why, is there? So with that preamble, let me tell you, we are about to do Cultivar Corner today on a product that we have done a lot. In fact, we've done product from Broken Coast about 6 times since we started the Cannabis podcast, and we're about to do it a 7th time. I picked up a quarter yesterday, and this is some broken cannabis. Well, it may be broken cannabis, but it is Broken Coast in terms of the type of cannabis that we are trying to purchase here. And why is that not going into my little dabber? There we go. Okay, so I picked up a quarter of Broken Coast Emergenz, and let's go to Broken Coast. Now, this was one of the challenges as I started to do this morning. You've heard me talk about the frustration before when I go to websites and I try to get information about what I'm smoking, and it's not there. So I went to brokencoast.com. They've got all of their strains or all of their cultivars identified, except this one. So I found some information at strainy.com or strainy.ca. Broken Coast Emergenz, a sativa dominant hybrid. So Emergenz Z or Emergenz Z, released by Broken Coast, is a sativa dominant hybrid commonly found in flower format. The strain lineage includes Sunset Sherbet and Orange Push Pop, resulting in a potent and uplifting high. With effects like feeling happy, uplifted, and creative, Emergenz Z is perfect for daytime use. Emergenz Z. I am Canadian, I should say it Emergenz Z. Common effects, happy, uplifted, and creative. Now here is one of the downsides of having a cold as I'm doing a Cultivar Corner. I put my nose into that jar, and I'm sure there's a lot of bountiful aromas in there, but none of them are coming to my nose today. The total terpenes, in fact, 3.72. I have beta-myrcene, delta-limonene, and beta-caryophyllene are my three predominant terpenes. My THC on Emergenz Z or Emergenz Z is sitting at 29.1%. I've got a joint rolled. I've got my crafty, no I don't, I have my Ariza Max Plus, my Ariza Air Max all ready to go. It's the cold. It's not that I'm stoned right now. I'm about to be, I'm hoping. So, Broken Coast, there's been a lot of good weed we have tried from Broken Coast over the years, and they've had their ups and downs. Let's give you a bit of the story on Broken Coast and give you a sense of where they have been and where they all started. Everyone knows the history of BC Bud. We lived it. Established in 2013 in 3 modest warehouse units, Broken Coast acquired the 4th license in British Columbia to cultivate cannabis and the 12th license in Canada. Since then, we've expanded into a bespoke indoor 44,000 square foot facility situated on the shores of the Salish Sea and the Emerald Rainforest of Vancouver Island. We continue to develop and cultivate the highest grade cannabis and strive to uphold the quality and reputation that BC Bud has earned worldwide. We employ premium processes in order to craft premium product. At Broken Coast, we specialize in premium dried flower. It's what we built our reputation on, and we feel it's a reputation well earned. The more we control the environment, the less we have to chance, so being in an indoor facility eliminates environmental variables while maintaining optimum productivity. This allows us to control every aspect of our process and perfect our results. No machine can match a human eye and a well-trained hand. We trim every Broken Coast harvest by hand, rather than using an automated tumbler. By choosing the slower path, we can inspect the quality of each individual bud. Since they raised that point, let me get out my jeweler's loupe. My new jeweler's loupe with some nice bright lights on it. And a nice good magnification. Oh, lovely little buds. Oh, and fairly chunky buds, too. And look at the trichome fields in those guys. So these are a light green, a lot of green pistils. I'm not seeing a lot of red hairs in this. There are some. Trichome fields are just everywhere. Nice and squishy buds. Now, again, in terms of the aroma, I'm not picking up a lot because of my cold at the moment. But in terms of squishiness in the bugs, there are on the buds, there is a little stickiness to them. Not quite as hard and rock solid as we've had from some growers of late. And I actually kind of prefer these a little bit. The rock solid ones are not my favorite. But here we go. This is Broken Coast. It is Emergenz. And what is Emergenz? They told us it was something. Here's my lineage. Sunset Sherbet and Orange Push Pop. Yeah, we did cover that already. Okay, it's still the cold in my head. So now, let me get my Air Max warmed up. Let's light the joint, and let's try Broken Coast Emergenz. And I am looking for some nice sativa effects today. Got a lot of stuff to get done. It is podcast, well, it's always podcast generation week. I've got a lot of stories I'm working on this week, plus I've also got some voiceover stuff that I'm doing. So it's been a fairly busy week for me. And today I'm looking to be a very productive day. Oh, first couple of tokes, really nice and smooth. Now, Again, because of my cold situation, I'm not picking up a lot of the flavors, which is one of the sad parts of smoking dope when you got a cold. It doesn't mean I can't be impacted by the effect, though. It's just the flavor that's kind of off for me today. Oh, yeah. Really nice and smooth. Now let's flip to the Air Max and see if I can pick up any of the flavor notes that are coming out of this through the vaporizer. Oh, yes, I can. So even though I'm somewhat limited in the cold today, when it goes into the Riser Air Max, get lots of those nice flavor notes. Yeah, definitely some citrus tones. Some of that caryophyllene, so some of that peppery notes are coming through. Oh, very, very tasty. Very, very smooth. If there is an attribute that I'm extremely pleased about at the moment, it is the smooth factor of it. Now, did we hit the THC? Yes, we did. We said it was at 29.1%. My total terps were at 3.72. And here they come. Here they come. Sorry, that may have sounded a little bit like the Monkees, which you probably don't even know what I'm talking about. Here it comes. Up and down my head. I get the funniest looks for everything I said. Hey, hey, we're the Monkees. Hey, hey, we got happy eyes. Yes, yes, yes. This is one of the times where I just love feeling those happy eyes coming on. I was hoping that Broken Coast was going to do it for me again. Haven't tried their stuff for a while. I'm not quite sure why. No real particular reason. Just decided it was time to do it again. I was in the store yesterday. Hi to the folks at Spirit Leaf. Still stopping by. Still enjoying shopping there. And picked up the 7 grams of Emergenz from Broken Coast. Jericho's the guy who sold it to me. Thank you, Jericho. And I am really enjoying the high. Let me get back to the Air Max. Oh, yeah, even with a cold profile, I can still pick up some of those flavor notes that come off of that vaporizer. It's just astounding. Again, if you have not tried the vaporizer yet, come on over for a visit. We'll have a sesh together, and I'll give you a taste of what the vaporizer is like. And maybe you will change your mind. Okay, it looks like we have achieved what we are out to achieve today. This is Broken Coast. This is Emergenz. It is a sativa. And again, the cross of this is Sunset Sherbet and Orange Push Pop. Some citrus, some grapefruit, some pine. Oh yeah, definitely getting the pine and a lot of those fruity notes. Certainly those citrusy notes, especially when I pull it out of the Air Max. Oh, and happy eyes coming on much stronger. That lovely euphoria of those beautiful sativas. Oh, I got stuff to do. I got some energy. I'm feeling good about it. This is going to be a good day. It's fun doing Cultivar Corners. It is fun making this a part of my job and sharing my enjoyment and my enthusiasm with you each and every time I open a new bag of weed. It's kind of fun. Broken Coast, Emergenz, 29.1% THC, 3.72% total terps. It's 7 grams. It's beautiful bud, nicely hand-trimmed, nicely cured, and giving me a pretty darn good buzz. Broken Coast? I'm loving your stuff.
Sharing stories about good weed while trying good weed. This is the Cannabis Podcast.
And for this story, we're going to mjbizdaily.com. This was written by David Hodes. Gelato, anyone? Hop latent viroid, already infecting most cannabis growers across the United States and Europe, is coming under greater scrutiny as researchers scramble for options to control the spread of the parasite, including making the plant resistant to the viroid. Some cannabis cultivars, such as Gelato 33, are showing a natural level of resistance, although it's unclear what variables contribute to their increased defenses. Viroids are remnants of ancient RNA that precede DNA and proteins during evolution. But hop latent viroid, HLVD, is the enemy of cannabis cultivators everywhere. First identified in 1987, HLVD plagues cannabis growers around the world by mutating plants, stunting their growth and drastically lowering THC levels. According to a study published in the journal Viruses, HLVD causes $4 billion in losses to cannabis growers each year. Hop latent viroid is highly contagious and transmitted mechanically from utensils used to harvest and process plant material, through shared water, or insects moving between plants. It also can exist on the seed coat or within the seed itself, and it can live there for a while. HLVD has been detected on cannabis seeds stored for more than 2 years. Researchers still are scratching their heads about how to stop the hop latent viroid and perhaps make the cannabis plant resistant to it. At the moment, we have no data on what could make a cannabis strain more resistant to hop latent viroid. Zamir Punja, professor of biological sciences at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, told MJ Biz Daily. Researchers worry that widespread viruses affecting other crops such as alfalfa, soybeans, and tobacco could make their way to cannabis at some point. Worse yet, according to a study published in the International Journal of Molecular Science, there is some evidence for the potential evolution of new and genetically diverse virus viroid strains that can infect and become established in cannabis crops. Rob Baldwin, Vice President of Cultivation and Greenhouse Operations for Pure Sun Farms in Vancouver, said if the viroid infects a mother plant, it can spread to the growth through clones. Since beginning operations in 2018, Pure Sun Farms has used various testing regimes to screen its plants for different types of disease and infection, including testing plant material for the hop viroid to ensure its clones are clean before they enter the greenhouse. When HLVD symptoms first were detected, Pure Sun Farms quickly ramped up its testing procedures to identify whether the pest had permeated the grow. The company routinely tests all mother plants to avoid transmission of the pathogen. Some plants, certain genetics for one reason or another, are going to be less susceptible to infection, Baldwin said. That probably comes from the hereditism that is carried on from breeding. If it had more landrace in it, it might be more resistant, he said, referring to strains that evolved to thrive in their native environments. Because of the latent nature of the viroid, it's difficult to say which strains are less susceptible to it, Baldwin said. Some strains showing no symptoms of the viroid may present later in their life cycle, he added. Cannabis plants do not have a natural resistance to the viroid, yet cultivators are noticing that some cultivars are less susceptible to HLVD infection than others. That sort of asymptomatic action to HLVD happens in different tomato cultivars as well. Researchers hope that studying certain cannabis cultivars and other plants will help identify the pinnacle of true plant resistance. A recent experiment on 12 different varieties of cannabis, half of which were purposely infected with HLVD, revealed that other interesting details about the viroid hinting at how to make the plant resistant to it. The plants were tested every 3 to 4 weeks until harvested, with researchers recording metrics about growth and yields in different varieties to help understand how HLVD symptoms correlate to different cultivars and the amount of viroid present in the plant. Cultivars that demonstrated low or essentially non-existent levels of viroid after 3 weeks included Gelato 33, Motorhead, and Oreos. Chilled cherries, purple milk, and wedding pie, meanwhile, showed very high levels of HLF infection after the same period. The idea would be to find enough resistant, sensitive, and tolerant varieties that we can look for the gene or set of genes in the DNA that's responsible for that resistance or tolerance, Saldi said. And then, theoretically, you could create your favorite strain, but alter that one gene, so that it is now resistant or tolerant to the viroid. But first, we have to figure out what that gene set, or set of genes, is. For now, keeping the viroid in check involves intense testing, sanitation of the facility, and eradication of infected plants. Pure Sun Farms used that methodology to reduce the incidence of HLVD in its operation from around 25% to 1% in about 8 months. But there's more to do, according to Baldwin. Cannabis breeding is still a little behind other crops, he said. People are working on breeding other disease resistance into, for example, powdery mildew. I think that's the way to go. We see that some cultivars get the viroid easier than others, so there must be something there. If research collaborators working on HLVD shared data, Saldi said, we could get viroid resistance accomplished in, I'm guessing, 5 years. The science is super unpredictable, she said, and some of it will probably come down to luck in finding those genes and then determining whether or not we can alter them. Well, I think we need to bring this viroid under control. and at least find a way to make our plants resistant to it.
Exploring the world of Canadian cannabis culture, one toke at a time. This is the Cannabis Podcast.
And when we discuss cannabis and the various flavors of cannabis, there are so many different components that come to play. There's, of course, the terpenes, there are the flavonoids, the esters, and today we're going to Mr. Stinky's garden and we're going to review flavonoids. Flavonoids are a third category of wellness molecule produced by the cannabis plant, beyond psychotropic cannabinoids and fragrant terpenes. Most cannabis consumers are familiar with cannabinoids, and more specifically, the two commercially dominant examples produced by the cannabis hemp plant, tetrahydrocannabinol, delta-9 THC, and cannabidiol, CBD. However, the herb produces two other families of wellness molecules beyond the set of roughly 146 cannabinoids discovered to date, terpenes and flavonoids. The functional distinction between these two families of phytomolecules is clear. Terpenes employ aroma to protect hemp and cannabis plants from pests and predators, while simultaneously attracting pollinators, insects or human cultivators. Likewise, flavonoids perform the same basic evolutionary function, but do so with plentiful pigment rather than abundant aroma. Modern peer-reviewed research has revealed that both terpenes and flavonoids possess value in the treatment of literally hundreds of disease states and adverse health conditions. All three families of chemical compounds produced by hemp have exhibited significant anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. This makes these phytomolecules potential therapeutic agents in the treatment of common diseases such as cancer, arthritis, epilepsy, Alzheimer's disease, depression, chronic pain, anxiety, and a variety of eating and sleeping disorders. Flavonoids, sometimes called bioflavonoids, are the third major family of wellness molecules produced by the hemp plant. The lack of attention to flavonoids by hemp industry professionals and the scientific community has inspired some thought leaders to label them the red-headed stepchildren of phytomolecules. Flavonoids are a diverse group of plant chemicals found in a large number of flowers, fruits, and vegetables. These special compounds are responsible for the sometimes vivid colors of the plants that produce them. Perhaps of greater value to humans, they also have demonstrated significant medicinal efficacy, most notably anti-cancer and anti-inflammatory benefits. Like terpenes, flavonoids are produced by thousands of plant types in nature beyond cannabis. In fact, tens of thousands of plant species collectively make more than 6,000 types of flavonoids. Of these, about 20 appear in the cannabis marijuana hemp genome. The Latin root of flavonoid is flavus. Literally interpreted, flavus means yellow. It's sometimes translated as organic natural yellow. Despite the understandably common misinterpretation of the root term's meaning as flavor in modern English, flavonoids serve the pigment-driven evolutionary function of attracting pollinators and dissuading pests for the plants that produce them. Flavor, for the most part, is provided by terpenes. In this respect, flavonoids are the usual equivalent of the aroma produced by terpenes. Both serve as sensory siren songs for pollinating insects of critical value to the propagation of the species, while simultaneously warning predators to stay away and seek their meal elsewhere. So there's a bit more of description for you on flavonoids, giving the bright colors to our cannabis, along with the terpenes and the flavor components, and let's not forget those esters, and perhaps we'll look at that in a different episode. And once more, let me thank you so much for being a listener of the Cannabis Podcast. I so appreciate the fact that you were here. And now, let's put a smile on your face. The name's Bong. James Bong. Hey, if you miss 420, don't worry. Just wait until 422. Because it's 422. What do you call a Catholic leader that uses cannabis? A dope pope. And you can't spell healthcare without THC. Now, that's a line I think we should get Health Canada to adopt. We may not be successful in that, but anyways, I really love that one. And that wraps it up for episode 156 of the Cannabis Podcast.
From the cannabis-infused studio, high above the Okanagan Valley, this was the Cannabis Podcast.
Thanks for listening to today's show. To check out more great cannabis podcasts, go to podconnects.com. Here's a preview of one of our other shows.
Hi, y'all. I'm Jo, host of Casually Baked the podcast. If you're curious to explore the highly responsible side of cannabis, farming, and legalization, I'm here to help lighten the stigma and build your canna confidence. Download episodes now of Casually Baked the Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. And journey with me through the evolving cannabis culture and discover how and why people like you are adding cannabis to their wellness toolkit. It's time to get casually baked.